Well, for more on this, we're now joined by one of our regular commentators in the Great Lakes region, and that's Channel Africa producer and analyst Nixon Katembo. Nixon, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Before we get on to this extension, take us back to when the state of siege was first announced. What was it supposed to do, and how successful has it been?
Well, if you recall, Peter, the state of siege was taken as a measure to curtail the killing of civilians that have been happening in those particular provinces of Eastern DRC, namely Ituri and the North Kivu province, where armed groups have been causing mayhem since 2014, and it's particularly with the killing of civilians, according to local social organizations and NGOs who says that at least over than 12,000 people have died in that conflict before the declaration of the state of siege. This is just a number that is collected by those civil society organizations. However, the asymmetric effects of the war has not been really measured, where a lot of people have died either through diseases in displaced camp or lack of food supplies, lack of medicines, and other treatable diseases because of the effects of this war. And every day there are new attacks in places like Beni, in places like Mangina, in places like Irumu, Oicha, Kamango, and places like Chondo. Just these are villages and different zones of the Beni region, which lies just across Uganda, on the border of Uganda and the DRC. And this is just blamed on ADF. However, many sources within the region have suggested that this conflict is just engineered somehow to curtail the economic activity of the people that are living in those areas. So you have that weaknesses of the state in failing to protect its civilians, and perhaps to just come up and say, okay, let's impose a state of siege that we're dealing with the armed group, namely also the ADF, which, to my recollections, and we have spoken about it on this very program, and when I said that is going to be a failure without security sector reform within the Congolese national government, and making sure that the army is well trained, well catered for, but also the issues of, violence against the civilian committed by the army itself. So this is where we are. It's not surprising that the MP have come to this conclusion of extending the state of siege for another 15 days, and one wonder whether the problem will be solved in those 15 days if it had failed for almost a year during this state of siege in those two provinces.
So a state of siege gives the army and the police special powers, much like during martial law or a state of emergency. Even with these powers, they've failed to be able to rein in these militias. What is it about the state of affairs in the region that's making it impossible for the security forces to make headway? And as you've alluded, it seems likely they're going to struggle in the next 15 days to progress much further.
There are several factors, Peter, that leads to the failure of the government to make sure that it reins in on these groups. One, the region has been plagued by this conflict since 1996, based on the package that you play there. And there are different armed groups that have emerged in that region. owing to the security, but also different people or player within the region. Namely, there are different armed groups such as the M23, the CNDP, and the ADF. But during that period, there have been initiative of bringing about peace and the restoration of armed group into the Congolese National Army to form part of the government. Negotiations after negotiations, a peace talk like the one that just concluded in Nairobi and which is due to take place again sometimes next week. So you have those factors. Then you have, on the other hand, as I said, the Congolese National Army itself accused of atrocities against civilians because of the nature of the composition, the very composition of the National Army, coming from different rebel factions and not really built on the basis of a Republican army, which is capable of defending the territorial integrity of the state, in this case, the entire DRC. So if you want to look at those vested interests, the places mainly rich in mineral resources such as gold, coltan. Lately, there have been a new agricultural addition, which is the production of cocoa. And some suggest that is more of a good quality to the likes of that one produced in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. So the DRC is gearing towards that. So you have those complex issues coming up together, and people, having vested economic interest in the control of such those resources, both agricultural resources and the mineral resources, but also the oil in Albertine, Graben, namely that area extending from northeastern DRC in the Ituri province up until Goma in the North Kivu province, where there have been a huge prospection of oil by Tullow Oil, which is a British company. So these are compounded issues.
Hello, Nixon, are you still there? All right.
You have to factor all those issues in really to understand the real problem that is affecting that region. And the ADF, of course, which was formerly and formed rather against the government of Yoweri Kaguta Museveni in 1996, which made its first attack in Kichwamba in 1996, and then the second also around the area called Bwera, still in western Uganda and Kasese district. But over the years, you would see that Uganda have been deploying in the area, the UN mission is in the area, the Force Intervention Brigade is in the area, both of which have done nothing actually to make sure that the civilian population are secured. And it goes again back to the questions, will these 15 days of extension of the state of siege solve the problem that have been there over the years?
Why extend it by 15 days? Why not just have a perpetual state of siege? Is there something to do with the legislation? Because it's not making much difference either way, really.
Well, according to the DRC constitution, you cannot really declare a state of emergency in a manner that they are doing it perpetually, because then that will be a total exclusion, a cut-off of the area from the rest of the DRC in terms of institutional framework and the governance. And you would recall that when a state of siege, which is virtually martial law, allowed the military to take over from the civilian rulers. So it's in a way that, these extensions explain the failure of government in itself to secure that area. And by the way, from local sources that I get from time to time, I engage people within the National Army who are claiming that this has become sort of a business for a hierarchy of the Congolese National Army as well, beside fighting the rebels or the insurgency in the area, but also money which is meant for soldiers who are on the ground being siphoned in that way. So as soon as they don't give a really tangible result, and the sooner they think that this is going to end, and therefore kind of a source of income as well in that aspect, do not come in. You have these extensions being recommended to National Security Council, and then the president, and therefore the Minister of Internal Affairs and Security, also defense, requested those extensions in Parliament.
My dear brother, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you always for your insights. I know that some might not always agree, but it does seem that some of the things that you've observed seem to keep playing out. So thank you very much indeed for your insights.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
All right, that's Channel Africa producer and African politics analyst, actually specializing in the Great Lakes region, telling us about the extension that's been granted to the DRC security forces, state of siege, particularly in the east of the country, trying to deal with the militia problem there.